From the Chesapeake Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental reporting, this is Chesapeake Uncharted, the podcast that uncovers stories about the bay, its interconnected ecosystem, and the people who rely on them. I'm Jeremy Cox. On today's episode,
talk about an animal that is intimately tied to the health of our waterways and our landscape. Shorebirds are as much a part of a marsh as a spice is at home in the kitchen.
This is the fifth and final in our series of episodes spotlighting the new Bay Journal film Chesapeake Rhythms. So far, we have learned about eels, monarch butterflies, and tundra swans. Today, we celebrate summer by heading to the beach. You can find all sorts of things there: lifeguards, seaweed, dolphins, and plenty of waves. You're also all but guaranteed to spot a shorebird or two. So that's our focus today. First, let's listen to the segment of the film that deals with shorebirds.
Spring and fall, the coast from Virginia to Delaware swells with bird life, seeking sanctuary and fuel along migratory routes that span whole hemispheres.
I'm Alex Wilkie, and I'm a coastal scientist at the Nature Conservancy's Virginia Coast Reserve, which is based on the eastern shore of Virginia, which is located at the very southern end of the Delmarva Peninsula. I started working here almost 22 years ago, and I was doing my graduate work with American oyster catchers, looking at the impacts of predators and predation on their nesting success. I immediately fell in love with this place. There's no other place like it on the entire Atlantic coast. And one of the groups that really stands out in terms of the relative importance of this place is shorebirds. Whether you're an oyster catcher looking for a good beach to lay your eggs and raise your young, or whether you're a whimbrel that maybe just arrived here from Brazil on your way to your breeding grounds in the Arctic, there's vast mud flats to feed on and marshes to rest in so that you can successfully make the rest of that journey. If you think about these birds flying along the Western Atlantic Flyway, they've spent all their fat reserves, they've spent all their energy, they need to stop and rest and refuel for a period of weeks. Places like the Virginia Coast Reserve, where you have 80 miles of undeveloped barrier island coastline, that is a sweet spot for them. Within our migratory bird program here at VCR, we really have some amazing opportunities to not only manage and protect shorebirds that are on the ground right here in our backyard and using this system, but we also have a really good opportunity to study these birds and look at where else do they go during the rest of their life cycle.
So this is an eastern willet. There are two types of willets in the world. There's a western willet that breeds in the middle of the United States, and then there are eastern willets that breed along the coastal Atlantic and to the Gulf of Mexico. During that breeding season, they're here till about September in our region, maybe even a little bit late into October. And then they migrate over the ocean, over the Atlantic towards Bermuda, and then they drop straight down to South America. So they're long-distance migrants. They're traveling about 4,000 miles in one direction.
There's amazing technology that's available right now that you can put on these birds to track their movements. And there's all different kinds, but one kind that we're using right now is called a GPS transmitter. These are very small devices. They're solar-powered devices, so they can continually recharge their batteries.
We position these around the legs, not the wings. So we want them to still have full range of motion. They're collecting a data point every 10 minutes or so. They're also collecting altitude, which is the most important part of our project, essentially, which is relating their migration to an offshore wind site that's being developed out of Virginia Beach. What we're trying to gauge is how high these birds are flying and if they might be impacted by the turbines that are being developed out there.
Spring migration here in coastal Virginia is absolutely phenomenal because you have this huge push of shorebirds that are moving from southern non-breeding grounds up to breeding grounds to the north of us. And that all happens in a relatively short period of time because these birds are wired to get to their breeding grounds, get to business, do what they need to do, and then get back to their non-breeding grounds. We have one opportunity here in particular called the Wimbrel Watch, which is a really incredible time of the year. So late afternoon, as night falls, we sit out on the marsh and we watch these birds rise up out of the marsh and head to the north and northwest of us. Some of those birds will literally not touch the ground until they reach their breeding grounds thousands of miles away. And so they can be flying for 3, 4, 5 days nonstop. So it's an incredible event.
A long-distance champion among shorebird migrators is the red knot, which makes an incredible annual circuit, Argentina to the Arctic and back, up to 19,000 miles. Its numbers have fallen to an estimated 26 to 40,000 from an historic abundance of 90 to 180,000. Flights of famished knots, along with multitudes of stilts, plovers, ruddy turnstones, and other migrants, peak along the Delaware Bay shores each May to gorge on the eggs of spawning horseshoe crabs. The horseshoe crabs themselves have been struggling here in the world epicenter of their abundance. Among the most ancient living creatures, they have been little changed in fossil records stretching back some 400 million years. The larger females move up onto the beach as the tide rises. They dig a hole, deposit their eggs, then pull the males along to fertilize them. A month later, the eggs will hatch. It's a shotgun approach to procreation that ensures plenty of eggs will be exposed to nourish shorebirds. A couple weeks of incessant pecking at tiny gray-green crab eggs strewn on the beaches can more than double a bird's weight. Watching the crabs come ashore on the full moon is to go back in time, long before the dinosaurs, before trees, before grass. Moon and the lap of sea on sand and the shell-on-shell grating of Limulus polyphemus. It's as elemental a scene as one can enter on today's Earth.
In general, sadly, across the globe, shorebird populations are in decline. I don't think there's any debate about that. They're struggling in a lot of cases. Habitat loss and degradation in so many parts of the world, it's so bad that these birds are losing the places that they need to survive. Climate change and sea level rise, their coastal habitats that they depend on are changing, are disappearing, or their food sources are being impacted. There's just so many threats that they're facing. We still have a long way to go to make sure that these populations are robust and resilient.
Hi, this is Laura Lutz, editor at the Chesapeake Bay Journal. I hope you're enjoying our podcast, and I'd like to invite you to join the community of Bay Journal readers. If you care about climate change, wildlife, clean air, healthy communities, and of course the Bay and its rivers, you'll find news you can use at the Bay Journal, along with some great ideas for outdoor travel. Our subscriptions are free. Check us out at bayjournal.com and click on subscribe to start receiving the best independent environmental news in the Bay region.
Welcome back. On this season of Chesapeake Uncharted, we've been taking a behind-the-scenes look at our new Bay Journal film, Chesapeake Rhythms. It explores the migration of 4 creatures that spend at least part of their lives in the Bay region. Today, we have our sights trained on shorebirds. My colleague, Lauren Hines Acosta, spoke to the film's producers about these birds and the efforts it took to capture them on film. Dave Harp directed the film and acted as cinematographer. He is a photojournalist and has been capturing the bay on film for more than 30 years. Tom Horton wrote the script, and you can hear him in the film as the narrator. He has written about the Chesapeake Bay for the past 50 years. Sandy Cannon Brown edited the film. She owns a film production company and taught environmental filmmaking at American University. Here's Lauren.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm Lauren Hines Acosta. This season, we're taking a behind-the-scenes look at our film, Chesapeake Rhythms. It explores the migration of 4 creatures that visit the bay. In this episode, we'll be talking about shorebirds. I'm here with the producers of the film, and welcome to the show.
Thanks,
Hi,
Lauren.
Thank you.
Awesome. So first, Dave and Tom, do I understand correctly that some of this footage was made possible only by surviving an epic hike along a remote beach?
Well, yes. It was only about a 3-mile hike on sand, which, that's not too difficult. But we're carrying, big lens, tripod, audio gear, 2 cameras, and stopping along the way just to try to get as many shots as possible. Yeah, by the end of that hike, I was pretty much spent. As we said earlier in one of our earlier segments about eels, there's certain things that we say, well, we're not going to do that again.
He used to not let me carry any of his stuff. It was kind of a point of pride. Now I wish he wouldn't let me carry it. Now,
That's the only reason I bring Tom along is carry my gear.
yeah, because I don't need much in the way of gear, a pencil, and a notebook.
Well, so there are many kinds of shorebirds, and your story touches on several, like oyster catchers and whimbrels. So why did y'all decide to cast such a wide net and not focus on one species, kind of like the other ones?
Well, to go back even further, if there's one theme or one of the big themes that's run through our work over our whole careers, it's the edge of land and water, the coastal edge, the bay edge. That's just where so much of the life, aquatic and on the wing, congregates and follows that edge. So, we've been looking at edges that's where we start a lot of our books and a lot of our film projects is with edges. And shorebird migrations just define the coastal edges, spring and fall coming and going, such a variety. So I guess, and you can't just single out any one. There's so many and they have such different lifestyles. Some are threatened, some are healthy. I don't know. Is that
well? And and also you can see from the footage that we shot that they're all interspersed. I mean, there's not like, okay, here's a flock of whimbrels coming in, and then here's a flock of oyster catchers or whatever. I think we were very fortunate that we linked up with Alex Wilkie, a biologist from the Nature Conservancy who has lived on the lived and worked on the Barrier Islands in their coastal preserve of the Nature Conservancy down in Virginia. So we had a place, and we knew the birds would be coming through there. And between that and then going up on the same week that we photographed Virginia, we went up to Delaware, where over the years we've filmed a lot of the interaction of horseshoe crabs and shorebirds, which we got into in the film.
Yeah, that was no. Go ahead.
No, it's just place is so important, as Tom said. Where land and water meet, the edges is where the critters are, and so that's where the photographers and the producers and the directors go.
The place we filmed with Alex Wilkie, the Virginia Coast Reserve of the Nature Conservancy, was one of the great land buys of all time in this country. Many years ago, they acquired 60-some, almost 70 miles of undeveloped ocean beach and back marshes, which is phenomenal along the east coast of America to have 70 miles of prime ocean front that's protected forever. And that's just one of the coolest places. Not easy to get there, even if you have a boat or a kayak. It's extremely shallow. The tides often will leave you stranded. Without someone like Alex and her boat skills and her colleagues, we couldn't have done that film.
Yeah, we don't need an excuse to go there. It is abject. It's just a beautiful place.
Yeah.
Well, moving a little up north, Sandy, you live on Martha's Vineyard, and you can make us a little more jealous about that fact. Is there what's your favorite shorebird to spot if you see him up there?
Difficult, but I think it's the same as down there, the great blue heron, which is a magnificent bird. I guess maybe that's my favorite up here because it reminds me of being on the Chesapeake Bay so much. But the bird life is very similar to what we see up here.
And what does the blue heron look like for our listeners?
Well, maybe Tom could describe it more scientifically, but it is a great big bird that stands about 2.5, 3 feet tall in some cases and has a long, long neck. And you see it dipping down into the water.
It is one of the great adapters and success stories, the great blue heron. I would vote for the great blue heron as the national bird because there are very few parts of America, even the Great Plains, where it doesn't inhabit. They can eat anything from little minnows to adult muskrats. Man, they got a neck like an anaconda. They can.
And they have backward knees, so they can move their legs move forward instead of backwards.
In fact, I'll tell you how widespread and loved they are. Years ago, Dave and I did a cover story for Smithsonian Magazine on the great blue heron, and at the time, it was the most back-ordered, requested issue they had ever published.
One of my memories on the bay, with speaking of the great blue heron, I think it was 2003 Hurricane Isabel. Before the lights went out, we lived on a cove. And I saw this heron. The winds were up to like 70 miles per hour, and the great blue heron is walking against the wind, standing straight up and proud, and it was amazing.
Yeah. Well, adding to that, what are the main threats that shorebirds overall face that you couldn't get into in this film?
Well, I think the main threats are loss of habitat, development of the coastlines, filling of marshes, places like Miami Beach that used to be probably shorebird habitat.
Ocean City, Maryland.
The whole New Jersey coast, you name it. You go back a few hundred years and those were all pretty good places for a shorebird to stop. So it's that loss of habitat to development. It's not so much agriculture as with the monarch. It's more coastal development. I'd say that's the big threat. There is some hunting of shorebirds on French-owned islands in South Central America. I wouldn't say that's the biggest thing. It's kind of an egregious thing, and the French government hasn't seemed inclined to stop it. But I would say that's minor to coastal development.
But Alex Wilkie talks about it in the film, is that the Virginia Coast Preserve is just this giant target for these birds because it is so natural and undeveloped. So we really played that up, and I think it's important to say that the places where we have left things alone, where nature is prevalent, where we haven't developed, or where the birds are congregating.
Yeah.
Yeah, your film notes that some of the research being conducted on shorebirds is meant to determine if an offshore wind farm being developed out there in that area will impact their migration. What do we know about that so far?
Yeah, what's happened is that a couple things. There's some money from the offshore wind developers who want to find out about the migratory patterns, particularly the altitude that these birds are flying at, to see if they might tangle with windmills. And there's now technology that can put a backpack tracker, solar powered, on the back of a very small bird. We may soon be able to put them on butterflies. The Nature Conservancy guy was saying the technology is so good. But I think they are still getting information, and I'm not sure what the latest is. It looked like they may be flying at altitudes where they can avoid the windmills, which would be good news, but I'm not sure the final word's in on that yet. I think it's gonna. I haven't checked recently, but they're just starting that, and it's data that just wasn't available until the technology made it possible.
Well, that's really all my main questions. Thanks so much for joining me on our podcast.
Sure, glad to be here.
Well, I just said thank you for doing this, but I did want to get a plug in for our two other people that are very important to this film. We take it to a certain point, but when you see it on air, the one thing that I'm not capable of doing to the best degree is sound design and sound mix, and sound makes all the difference. And when you hear all the different, especially with the Shorebirds, when you have all those different voices to blend in, that's very important. And that Richard Anderson is our tech on that. Richard also takes the film and does what is called color correction. Because even though Dave's photographs and photography is amazing, if he does one at this time of day and one is a cloudy day and this and that, it becomes distracting to see the changes. So a color correctionist will take the film and blend it so it all looks absolutely gorgeous and blends together. So Richard Anderson does an amazing job with that. And then we have to give a big shout out to William Troxler, who does the original score of these films. It's absolutely amazing. The added texture and the added emphasis and emotion that the music and the sound can bring to a film.
On now to our final segment. An audio postcard from the Delmarva Peninsula. That's the low-lying landmass between the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean. It's carved up into 3 states. I'm in Maryland, just north of the Virginia line. Bumping down a sandy road in a white pickup truck belonging to the Assateague Coastal Trust, an environmental group in the region. Behind the wheel is Taylor Swanson, the group's executive director. His other title, the Assateague Coast Keeper, reflects that he's the region's water keeper. We're heading to the shore on the Atlantic side of the peninsula, but on our way, the scene is decidedly agricultural. Corn and wheat fields glowing green in the morning sun. We were just saying this last part of the trip was classic Delmarva, right? And you had a good explanation for that.
What does it look like? Coastal Iowa, here we are.
Coastal Iowa. But we just got off onto this very sandy dirt road here, very rutted, and just changed completely. What are we heading into here?
We're heading out into one of the central parts of Chesapeake Bay, where we got a pretty cool spot with a mix of habitat that all culminates in a very large salt marsh with a very large salt marsh pond that tends to attract a lot of our migrating shorebirds.
The scenery eventually gives way to a pine-dominated forest for a mile or so. Then, the trees peter out. There's no longer a canopy overhead. The sun shines hard into our eyes. A huge sky looms down on us, and all around on either side of the road, we see the greens and tans of a salt marsh, interspersed with ripples of open water. And it looks like we're pulling up onto a beach here.
Yeah, we're going to figure out. I'm not get stuck. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to park backwards, and we're going to deal with it later, assuming these guys are going to leave before us. If they don't, we'll solve that problem later.
Oh, okay. Sounds good to me. We parked next to another truck that presumably carried the two birders with their scopes we'd seen just a little ways back up the road. It's them and us, the only human life for miles in any direction. Swanson unfurls a tripod along the side of the road and mounts a scope on top. Pretty soon, he starts listing the birds in his viewfinder. Willets, greater and lesser yellowlegs, oyster catchers, black-bellied plovers, 2 different kinds of dowagers.
Yeah, they're here because there's a very large open pond in the middle of this extensive marsh. The pond is very shallow. Most of it is probably less than a foot deep, and as the tide is going out, it exposes big swaths of mud. And so these guys are here to feed. They're refueling on a journey northward right now. You know, we're in spring migration, so a lot of these birds are coming from the Gulf Coast, southern U.S. Some of them are coming from the northern part of South America.
The sandy road is a finger of highish ground jutting into Chincoteague Bay. Swanson and I spent the next several minutes shuffling along and stopping to take in the picturesque panorama.
Between me and the water, there's a bit of salt marsh, and the birds are just out there standing in this water that could be 10 feet deep, if not for the fact that they're standing in the mud flat there, and it barely comes up to their little bird knees, I guess. And they're just out there dipping their heads in the water, coming up with a little bite of food, and then going back down in again. So it's all about calories here. It's sort of like a rest stop on the highway. So instead of Burger King, it's invertebrates like worms and little shrimp.
If you spend any time in nature, it's not that hard to tell when something was made by humans, instead of by the whims of wind and waves. And that's when you start seeing right angles, like the arrow straight ditch in the middle of the marsh.
What we're looking at is there's a channel right here, a ditch that was built back in I believe it was the 30s by the Army Corps of Engineers. It was a strategy to get salt water into the marsh to help with mosquitoes at the time. And the kind of sediment that has accumulated along the edge of these ditches, the water now has trouble draining from the marsh, and it's ponding up into the marsh, and it's starting to kill grass.
It's been estimated that 90% of the salt marshes from Maine to Virginia were ditched like this during the Great Depression. That percentage is likely a bit lower now because some have filled in over time, but many remain. Swanson explained that these so-called mosquito ditches are like a ticking time bomb.
We estimate we've lost even up to, I've heard estimates of about a quarter of our marshland in the last 20 years. And it's really evident when you get up in the sky and you can really look down.
Swanson pulls out his phone where he has evidence of the phenomenon.
Look, here's a video we took from the air on this past Monday. Let's see, you can see those channels I was talking about that were dug out by the Army Corps and now are keeping water in the marsh just because of the inadvertent shape of the berms on the edge of those channels. But now the marsh floods regularly and then it doesn't drain.
It looks like a failed golf course development.
It does indeed. The effect in the long run is that without the grasses holding the marsh soil together, you have widespread catastrophic erosion, and I think that's what we're really staring down here on the coast. Is we're not more than a couple decades away from seeing some pretty catastrophic marsh loss if we don't really step in and do something about it.
It would be bad enough that the mosquito ditches are exacerbating the flooding of marsh grasses, leading to their demise. But climate change is causing seas to rise and storm inundation to become more frequent. Where you have ditches, the marsh is even more vulnerable to flooding under this scenario. And that's bad news for shorebirds, Swanson said.
Everyone that's lost, it means we're losing more birds. They don't all necessarily displace. that displacement takes a lot of energy out of them, and that might mean they don't make it to their breeding ground on time, or it might mean they don't make it at all.
Swanson has a hard time fathoming how bleak the future would be without places like this, where the land, the water, and the shorebirds all meet.
These are places that have events going on that are worthy of a song or a poem. The shorebirds we're looking at have come from thousands of miles away, have chosen here to rest up and refuel, and then they're on their way. It's just another one of those just magical cycles that's happening on the earth.
There are solutions, like plugging ditches and sowing new grass seeds into the mud. That would get expensive fast, given the scope of the problem. Swanson said that governments and nonprofits need to prioritize which locations are the most important to save and shore up the land, without, of course, making the mistakes of the past by simply causing other problems elsewhere.
We got to deal with one problem from the 30s, and we also got to look ahead to our 30s, which are right around the corner.
Well, thank you for listening to this season of Chesapeake Uncharted. You've made it to the last episode of the season. Congratulations. On behalf of myself and my co-producer, Lauren Hines Acosta, and the entire team, we're grateful you decided to spend some time with us. Remember, the story of the Bay's restoration continues in the print edition of the Bay Journal and online at bayjournal.com. And you can find the film Chesapeake Rhythms on our YouTube page or on our website under the Multimedia tab. And now, on with the credits. Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you by the Bay Journal, an independent nonprofit environmental news source for the Chesapeake Bay region. This episode was produced by Jeremy Cox and Lauren Hines Acosta. The story was edited by Laura Lutz. Our marketing and advertising director is Jackie Kane. You can find more episodes of Chesapeake Uncharted on your favorite streaming service or on our website, bayjournal.com. If you like what you're hearing, sign up for a free Bay Journal news subscription too, also on our website at bayjournal.com. Until next time, this is Jeremy Cox. Take care.